Welcome to the MacMillan Report. I'm Marilyn Wilkes, your host, and our guest is Emma Skye, a senior fellow at the Jackson Institute at the MacMillan Center, where she lectures on Iraq and Middle East politics. She is a British citizen who has worked at senior levels on behalf of the U.S. and U.K. governments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Jerusalem, across the fields of development, defense, and diplomacy, and with both civilian and military agencies. Today, we talk with Professor Skye about her new book, The Unraveling: High Hopes and Missed Opportunities in Iraq. Welcome, Professor Skye.
Thank you.
Let's begin with an overview of your book. Tell us about it.
The book tells about my experiences in Iraq. I first went to Iraq in 2003, where I was the senior civilian representative of the coalition in Kirkuk. And it goes through the surge in 2007, when I was a political advisor to General Obieno, then through the drawdown of US troops, and ends in 2014 with the takeover of a third of the country by the Islamic State. I felt I'd witnessed so many of these key events that I felt almost a duty to write about it. And I wanted to honor the efforts of all those who worked in Iraq and strive to make the country a better place. I wanted to remember the people who lost their lives. And I wanted to pay tribute to the country of Iraq. It's a country that I came very much to love.
So you were there for more than a decade, and you actually volunteered to help rebuild Iraq after the fall of the regime. Why did you do that?
Well, the British government asked for volunteers to help rebuild the country. It was supposed to be for 3 months before we handed the country back over to the Iraqis.
3 months.
3 months it was supposed to be. And I was against the war, and I thought, here's my chance to go to Iraq, to apologize to Iraqis for the war, and to help them rebuild the country. I'd worked for a decade in Israel, Palestine, and I felt I had skills to contribute in conflict mediation and institutional development.
Okay, so in the decade or so that you were there, how would you categorize your experiences and the time you spent there?
It was the most challenging experience of my life. I was nearly killed a number of times.
Wow.
And people I know lost their lives there. But I grew as a person. I made extraordinary bonds with American soldiers, and I made really great Iraqi friends.
Tell us about daily life. What did you do on a daily basis? Give us some examples of what it was like for you.
No day in Iraq is the same. So it's very difficult to talk about a typical day because there wasn't a typical day.
Okay.
But the morning would start very early. It would be going to meetings with the US military, where all the events of the evening, the day before, were covered, then deciding what was the schedule for the day, and then going out. So often I would go with General Obieno to visit troops, then we would go and have meetings with Iraqis, right the way through till 7 or 8 o'clock, and then at night I would go out and see more Iraqis.
Were you in the middle of any kind of gunfire?
Well, I'd only been in Iraq a week when my house was attacked with me in it.
And
So
how was it attacked?
Insurgents came to the front door with rockets. And the rockets came into the house, but fortunately for me, they exploded between the ceiling and the bed where I was sleeping. So I was very fortunate, and that was in my first week.
And why did you not run back to England?
I couldn't.
No?
I couldn't. I really felt I've got to stay and help rebuild this country.
Had you ever been in anything like that before in other countries? Was that your first experience with that kind of a situation?
Well, I had worked in Gaza and the West Bank before, so I was used to a difficult situation, but I never experienced anything like Iraq when I myself could be a target, let alone just in the wrong place.
Right. So you originally, you believed that basically a stable government was on the brink of happening, and then things went very awry, and that opportunity was squandered. What happened?
You know, during the surge, the level of violence in Iraq decreased dramatically. And we and the Iraqis felt the country is on the right track. It's going to go in the right direction. In 2010, the national elections were held, high participation, and the results were very, very close, contested results. And unfortunately, the US didn't uphold the right of the winning bloc to have first go at trying to form the government. Instead, the US government insisted on keeping the incumbent, Nouri al-Maliki, in power.
And why did they do that, do you think?
I think because it appeared the easiest option. Obama had campaigned to end the Iraq War. It seemed easier to keep the incumbent rather than trying to help a new government be formed with a new leader. And unfortunately, Maliki then went on to follow very sectarian policies, alienated the Sunni population. There were widespread protests, and the Islamic State rose to power.
So in that moment, when that occurred, what was going on in your head? Did you know right out that that would be a terrible decision?
Yes, I did, because it meant that people wouldn't trust the system. It's a very new system. People have got to believe that change comes about through elections rather than through violence. If they try elections and they can't bring about change, then they lose faith in the system.
So the people on the ground like yourself were they not saying to the US government, listen, this is a mistake?
Yes, no,
Yes.
this was a big internal debate.
Okay.
And unfortunately, those who said, look, give the winning bloc first go, it might not succeed, but at least people could see the elections have been honoured.
Right.
The guy who won the elections gets first go at trying to form the government. If he fails, it goes to the next candidate.
Okay. So unfortunately, then that was the decline to where we are today, or were there subsequent mistakes as well made?
That was the major
major
mistake,
one.
because it was very difficult to recover from that afterwards.
So today, what do you think needs to happen in Iraq for a stable government to develop?
I think it's very difficult to form a stable government in Iraq. The Islamic State needs to be defeated. The Shia militias need to be demobilized. And you've got to push Iran back out of Iraq. And power needs to be decentralized away from Baghdad to allow the provinces more say in their own affairs.
Do you foresee yourself going back there and continuing the work that you had been doing?
I don't foresee myself going back to Iraq to work, but I go back on a regular basis to visit my friends in Iraq.
And what is their life like now, given the current situation?
It depends. It's very different in different parts of the country. In the south, where the majority of the population is Shia, there's progress being made. People's standard of living is improving. In Kurdistan, there has been good progress as well. But in the Sunni areas of Iraq, there's massive population displacement. Lots of people have been kicked out of their homes or have fled in fear.
What do you think the future holds for Iraq,
It's hard to be optimistic.
realistically speaking?
It's hard to be optimistic about the future of Iraq, but it's a land with a great history. It gave the world the written law, first settled agriculture. It was where the Talmud was written. Baghdad used to be capital of culture of the Arab world. And so we have to hope that a new generation will come that will draw inspiration from that great history.
If there's one thing that you'd like readers to take from your book, a lesson perhaps, what would it be?
I think the lesson would be a lesson of common humanity, that really there's much more that unites us than divides us.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your work.
Thank you very much.
For more information about Professor Skye and her book, please visit our website at yale.edu/MacMillan Report. Be sure to join us again for another episode of the MacMillan Report, made possible through funding from the Whitney and Betty MacMillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale.